Most people think hunters are the ones doing the stalking. But if you've ever been deep in the woods, you know that silence can turn on you. The trees start to feel like they're hiding something. And sometimes what's waiting out there isn't an animal. These are 4 hunting stories that prove the woods can hunt you back. I was 19 years old when this happened, and it's something that still gives me chills every time I think about it. To set the scene, it was deer season in rural Pennsylvania, and I had gone out to hunt with my uncle. He owned a pretty big stretch of land out in the country, mostly woods and valleys, with a few ridges running through the property. Hunting was something my uncle took very seriously. He grew up doing it with his father, and I was just starting to learn. It was early in the morning, that cold kind of morning where your breath comes out in thick clouds, and the sound of a single twig snapping feels like it echoes for miles. When we got out there, my uncle suggested we split up. He told me he'd take the ridge while I stayed down low in the valley. That way, if a deer spooked, one of us might still get a shot depending on which way it ran. I wasn't nervous about being alone, at least not at first. I had my rifle, plenty of ammo, and I had been in those woods before with him, so I thought I knew my way around pretty well. For the first hour, it was exactly what you'd expect from a hunt. The forest was dead quiet. Every so often, I'd hear the crunch of my boots on the frozen leaves or the call of a crow echoing through the trees. The sun was only barely breaking through the branches, giving everything that hazy, bluish tint that happens right before the light really hits. That's when I noticed movement. Just a flicker at first, something orange through the trees. My immediate thought was simple: another hunter. It made sense. After all, during deer season you expect to see a couple of people out in the woods. Safety rules mean everyone is supposed to wear orange, so no one accidentally mistakes you for a deer. But when I got a better look, something about it struck me as wrong. It was definitely a man. He was standing about 50 yards away, almost directly across the valley from me. He wore a bright orange hunting hat, so bright it stood out like fire in the gray of the trees. But the strange part was that he wasn't carrying a rifle. He wasn't even dressed like a hunter, not really. His clothes didn't seem to match the season, like an old jacket that was too thin for the cold, and dark pants that looked more like work clothes than hunting gear. I raised my hand and gave a polite wave, the kind of thing you do when you're both out there for the same reason and don't want to startle each other. But he didn't wave back. He didn't move at all. Instead, he just tilted his head to one side, like a dog trying to understand what it's looking at. It was such a small movement, but it made my stomach drop. There was something unsettling about the way he was standing. Too still, too stiff, like he wasn't really a person but more like a mannequin propped up in the trees. For a few seconds, I just stared back. My hand lowered slowly, and I tightened my grip on my rifle. I thought about calling out to him, but something in my gut told me not to. The longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. And then, just like that, he moved. He took a single step to his left, slipping behind a thick tree trunk. I expected him to come back into view on the other side, but he didn't. I waited. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, full minute, nothing. Finally, I started walking toward where I'd seen him. Each step crunched louder than I wanted, and my ears were straining for any sound of movement ahead of me. When I reached the tree, I fully expected to see him crouched there, or maybe walking further into the woods. But when I circled around it, there was nobody. The forest was completely empty. Even stranger, the ground was covered in frost and a thin layer of leaves. My boots left clear imprints behind me, but when I searched the area where he had been standing, there were no footprints, no disturbed leaves, no sign that anyone had ever been there. I stood there for what felt like forever, scanning the woods, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence was unbearable. You don't realize how alive the forest usually is until it's suddenly still, like everything around me was holding its breath. Eventually, I decided I needed to get back to my uncle. I didn't want to admit it, but I was spooked. I tried to convince myself maybe it was a trick of the light, or maybe another hunter had been there and just moved on quickly. But the lack of footprints nagged at me the whole way back. When I finally met up with my uncle on the ridge, I told him what I had seen. I tried to make it sound casual, like maybe I was just being jumpy. But the second I mentioned the orange hat, I watched the color drain from his face. "That's not possible," he said flatly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "No one else is allowed on this land," he told me. "It's posted all around. I keep the gates locked. The only people who should be out here are you and me." The way he said it made my skin prickle. I could tell he believed me, but he also seemed disturbed in a way I hadn't seen before. My uncle was not the kind of man who rattled easily. We packed up not long after that, and I couldn't shake the image of that man the whole way back. The orange hat glowing like fire, the way his head tilted, the way he vanished without a trace. Later that night, when we were back at his cabin, I brought it up again. I asked him if he thought maybe it was just a trespasser, someone ignoring the no hunting signs. He shook his head slowly. "I've heard stories," he admitted. "What kind of stories?" I asked. He hesitated, then finally said, "About a man in an orange hat. Other hunters around here say they've seen him too. Always at a distance, always watching. But when you get closer, he's gone. Some people say he's the ghost of a hunter who died out here years ago." I didn't know what to say to that. I wanted to laugh it off, but the memory was too fresh, too real. To this day, I don't know what I saw in those woods. I've tried to rationalize it, to come up with some explanation that makes sense, but I always come back to the same thing. There were no footprints, no sign of another person at all. Just me, my uncle, and the forest. But I know what I saw. I saw the man in the orange hat. Have you ever seen something in the woods that you can't explain? If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true horror stories. I was elk hunting in Montana with two of my close friends, and the memory of what happened on that trip still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was late October, and we had planned this trip for months. We drove up into the mountains and hiked in about 5 miles from the nearest road. The three of us set up camp deep in the backcountry, far away from other hunters, far away from any towns or cabins. That was the appeal for us. Just wilderness, solitude, and the chance to hunt in an area that wasn't crowded. The first day was uneventful. We spent the daylight hours hiking through ridges, glassing open meadows, and moving through thick timber, hoping to catch sight of elk. By the time the sun went down, we were exhausted. We cooked a simple meal over the fire and crawled into our tent. It was one of those big 3-man tents, with all of us laying side by side in sleeping bags. By the time I dozed off, the forest outside was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. That kind of silence that only happens deep in the mountains, where even the wind feels muffled by the trees. At some point, I woke up. I glanced at my watch. It was a little past 2 a.m. At first, I wasn't sure what had stirred me until I really listened. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't an animal moving through the brush. It was whistling. A long, drawn-out whistle, slow and deliberate. It rose and fell in pitch, almost like someone trying to get attention. Not a tune, not a bird, but a human whistle. I froze instantly. My body tensed up, and my breathing grew shallow. I lay there in my sleeping bag, eyes wide, staring at the roof of the tent. My first thought, irrational as it was that maybe one of my friends was messing with me. Maybe they had snuck out of the tent and were trying to scare me. But when I carefully turned my head to the side, I saw both of them lying right there. How cold. One was lightly snoring, the other rolled over, completely still. That's when the whistle came again. Closer this time. It circled the tent. I could hear it moving slowly, as if someone were walking around us in the dark. The whistle would rise, fall, then stop, followed by the faint crunch of something heavy pressing against dirt and pine needles. Then it would start up again from a different angle, as though whoever or whatever it was pacing around our camp. I wanted to unzip the tent flap and shine my flashlight out, but I couldn't make myself do it. Every instinct in me screamed to stay still, stay quiet, and not draw attention to myself. My pulse was hammering in my ears, and I was suddenly aware of how thin the nylon wall of the tent really was. A single swipe of a knife or even a hard kick could tear it open. I thought about waking my friends, but I couldn't move. My hand was halfway out of the sleeping bag, shaking, when the whistling stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. I waited, straining my ears for any hint of movement. Seconds dragged into minutes. My throat was dry, and my body ached from how rigidly I was holding still. And then, nothing. The sound was gone. Whoever had been out there was gone, too. At some point, I must have drifted back to sleep, though I don't remember how. When I woke up again, the sun was barely up, casting gray light across the forest. My friends were just starting to stir, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. I sat up immediately and told them what I had heard. They both looked skeptical at first, joking that maybe I dreamed it or imagined things. But then we stepped outside the tent. The ground around our camp was soft dirt and patches of pine duff. And there, clear as day, were footprints. Not animal tracks, not scuffs or random indentations. These were heavy boot prints, big ones. They circled our camp, around and around, weaving in and out near the fire pit, stopping just a few feet from our tent before curving away again. But the strangest part, and the part that makes my skin crawl to this day, was that there were no tracks leading into our camp, and no tracks leading away, only the circles. We followed them out a little ways, trying to see where they had started. But the farther we went, the more they just seemed to vanish, fading into undisturbed ground as if the person had appeared out of nowhere. My friends went quiet then. They weren't laughing anymore. The rest of the trip was ruined for me. We still went out and hunted during the day, but every time I caught movement in the trees or heard a twig snap, my stomach twisted into knots. Every night, I lay awake listening, waiting for the sound of that whistle to come back. It never did. But in some ways, the silence felt even worse. On the hike back to the truck, I kept replaying it all in my head, trying to make sense of it. Maybe some drifter was living out in the woods. Maybe another hunter had decided to scare us for camping in his spot. But those footprints made no sense. There should have been a trail in, a trail out. There wasn't. And that whistle, slow, deliberate, circling us in the dark. It wasn't something I'll ever forget. To this day, I don't know if it was a person, something else, or something I can't explain. All I know is that when you're deep in the wilderness, miles away from civilization, there are things out there that you can't always rationalize. And if you ever hear whistling in the middle of the night, circling your camp, don't make the mistake I did. Don't stay frozen, pretending it's nothing. Because sometimes pretending doesn't make it go away. Have you ever heard something unexplainable in the woods? If the story gave you chills, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true horror stories. I went hunting on leased land in Georgia with a buddy of mine. We were after wild hogs, which are all over the place out there. They tear up crops, dig through the soil, and can be dangerous if you surprise them. It was supposed to be a pretty normal trip, just a day out in the woods with rifles, tracking sign, and hopefully getting some meat in the cooler. The land we were on was private, leased from a timber company. A lot of hunters pay for access during the season, and this particular tract was huge. Pine trees stretched for miles, with dirt logging roads cutting through them, and low spots where the ground turned swampy. The air was heavy with that damp, resin smell of pine needles, and the only sounds were our boots crunching the ground and the occasional call of a crow somewhere in the distance. We had been tracking hog sign most of the morning. Rooted soil, droppings, fresh tracks. We were moving quietly, rifle slung, not really talking much, just focused on what was ahead. That's when we found it. It was tucked back in a thick stand of pines, far from the roads or any of the marked hunting spots. A shack. At first, we thought it was some kind of old hunter's cabin. Hunters will sometimes throw together makeshift blinds or little storage spots for gear. But as we got closer, we realized this was different. The shack was small, barely bigger than a tool shed. The wood was weathered and gray, the roof sagging with years of rot. The windows were all covered with sheets of plywood, nailed in tight. The door was chained shut with a thick, rusted padlock. We exchanged a glance, and I remember laughing nervously. "What the hell is this doing out here?" I asked. My buddy shrugged, but he was just as unsettled. It didn't look like any kind of hunting blind or storage shed. It looked wrong, like it wasn't meant to be found. Curiosity got the better of us. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer. The shack had a smell to it. Not rotting wood exactly, but stale, like something shut up for a long time. I noticed one of the plywood boards over a window had a small gap where it had warped, just wide enough to peek through. I hesitated, then leaned in, and that's when I saw it. Inside, taped to the walls, were photographs. Dozens of them, maybe more than 50. Polaroids. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was looking at. The photos showed people, hunters. Every single picture was of someone outdoors, standing in the woods, holding a rifle, or leaning against a truck with blaze orange gear. They all looked like normal snapshots you'd take during a hunting trip. But there was something horribly wrong about them. Every face, every single one, had a big red X drawn over it. The Polaroids were arranged in rows, covering the walls like a sick kind of wallpaper. Some of them looked old, yellowed with age. Others looked new, like they had been taken just weeks ago. I felt my stomach drop. "What do you see?" my buddy whispered. I didn't answer right away. Couldn't. My mouth was dry, and my skin felt cold even though the Georgia heat was still clinging to the air. Finally, I pulled back from the crack and shook my head. "You don't want to look," I told him. That was enough. He didn't argue. Something about the tone in my voice must have told him everything. We didn't stick around. We didn't try to open the door, we didn't take pictures, we didn't even talk about it. We turned and started walking fast. Within seconds, that walk turned into a sprint. We left our gear behind. Backpacks, even a cooler we had set down earlier, and just ran. I can still remember the sound of our boots pounding the dirt, the branches snapping back as we shoved through them, my heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to get out. When we finally reached the truck, we didn't stop moving until we were inside with the doors locked. Both of us sat there, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath, staring at each other. Neither of us said much on the drive out. There wasn't anything to say. We both knew what we had seen. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying those Polaroids over and over. Hunters just like us, smiling at the camera or standing by their gear, every face crossed out in red. It wasn't just creepy, it felt personal. Like whoever had made that collection wasn't just watching hunters. They were targeting them, cataloging them. The thing that still gets me is how recent some of those photos looked. One of them, and I'll never forget this, was of a guy standing next to a pickup truck. The license plate was visible, and it was the same state as ours. I never went back to that leased land again. My buddy didn't either. We canceled the lease and never returned, even though it cost us a good chunk of money. It wasn't worth it. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder who built that shack, who put those photos up, and where they are now, because someone out there was, and maybe still is, keeping track of hunters in those woods. And I thank God every day that I didn't become another Polaroid on that wall. What would you have done if you found that shack? If this story creeped you out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true horror stories. This story isn't mine. It's my dad's. He told it to me a handful of times when I was growing up, always in that same serious tone that made my skin prickle. He wasn't the type to exaggerate or try to scare me for fun. If anything, he downplayed things. But with this story, you could tell it still bothered him decades later. It happened back in the late 1980s. My dad was in his 20s, hunting whitetail alone in upstate New York. If you've never been up there, you might not understand just how remote those woods are. It's not like going for a hike on a park trail. This is wilderness. Long ridges of hardwoods, low swampy bottoms, endless thickets of brush where you can wander for hours without crossing paths with anyone. Even today, you can still find places where you feel completely cut off from the rest of the world. Back then, it was even more isolated. My dad was an experienced hunter. He grew up in those woods, knew the land, knew the game, and most importantly, knew how to stay safe. He always wore blaze orange, always identified his target before raising his rifle, always followed the rules. He wasn't careless. That particular evening, he was set up on a ridge that overlooked a narrow clearing. the kind of spot where deer often cut across at dusk on their way to feed. The sun was dipping low, bleeding orange light through the trees, casting long shadows. He figured he had maybe half an hour left of good shooting time, and then he saw it, movement at the edge of the clearing. A buck. It was cautious, testing the air, ears twitching as it stepped slowly out of the cover. My dad raised his rifle, steady and calm, the way he had done hundreds of times before. He slowed his breathing, finger hovering just outside the trigger. But just as he was about to fire, another gunshot exploded. Not from his own rifle. This one came from the woods nearby, so close that his ears rang with the impact. The bark of the tree beside his face exploded in a shower of splinters. A bullet slammed into the trunk not even 2 feet from his head. He didn't think. He dropped flat, face pressed into the dirt, heart pounding so hard he swore it might give him away. Then instinct kicked in. He shouted loud, panicked, but clear. "Hunter here. Don't shoot. I'm not a deer." That's what you're supposed to do. If another hunter mistakes you for game, you announce yourself, you make it obvious. Most of the time, it's enough to defuse the situation. But the response he got was not what he expected. From the brush downhill, he heard footsteps. Heavy, fast, thrashing through leaves. Running. Not toward him. Away. Whoever had fired that shot wasn't coming to check. They weren't calling out an apology. They weren't making sure he was okay. They were fleeing. That realization froze my dad more than the bullet had. Because if it had been an accident, if someone had truly mistaken him for game, they would have been horrified. They would have run over, stammering apologies, desperate to make sure they hadn't just killed a man. But this person didn't stop. They didn't look back. They just bolted. And in that instant, my dad understood something that chilled him to his core. That shot hadn't been an accident. Someone had aimed at him. Deliberately. He stayed down for a long time after that. Minutes that felt like hours. Lying flat against the earth, eyes darting between the trees. Every crack of a branch made him flinch. Every shifting shadow made him raise his rifle just in case someone circled back. The woods, normally alive with little sounds, had gone unnervingly still. No bird calls, no squirrels rustling leaves. Just his ragged breathing and the fading echo of that gunshot replaying in his mind. Finally, when the silence held long enough, he made a decision. He needed to get out of there. He kept low, moving slowly at first, scanning the woods with every step. His boots pressed carefully against the leaves, trying not to snap twigs that would give away his position. The ridge sloped down into thick brush, and every patch of shadows felt like it was hiding someone. He carried his rifle in both hands, finger near the trigger, ready for another shot to come at any second. The hike back to the truck should have taken maybe 40 minutes. Felt like days. Every sound became a threat. A twig snapping behind him made his chest seize. The rush of wind through the branches sounded like footsteps keeping pace just out of sight. More than once, he stopped, spinning around, certain someone was tailing him. But there was nothing there. Only endless woods, stretching on in every direction, swallowing him whole. The worst part, he said, was that feeling of being hunted. That whoever had fired at him was still out there, watching, waiting for a better chance. He couldn't shake it. By the time he reached the logging road, sweat was soaking through his jacket despite the cold. His throat was dry, and his legs shook with every step. When he finally spotted the truck parked at the end of the road, it felt like salvation. He climbed inside, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time, rifle across his lap, staring at the tree line, half expecting to see someone step out. But no one did. When he finally drove away, he didn't look back. Years later, when he told me the story, I asked him if he thought maybe it really had just been some reckless hunter. Someone taking a stupid shot without checking. He shook his head, flat and certain. "No," he said, "that wasn't an accident. Someone was trying to hit me." I asked him why anyone would do that. Why someone would deliberately fire on a stranger in the woods. He shrugged. "People are crazy. Out there, no one would have found me until it was too late." And he wasn't wrong. That spot was miles from the nearest house, miles from the nearest paved road. If he had been hit, it could have been hours, even days, before someone stumbled across him. That thought has stuck with me more than anything. Someone out there, maybe another hunter, maybe not, deliberately tried to kill him, and they got away with it. My dad still hunts today, but he never went back to that ridge. And whenever he does head out alone, he admits the memory crosses his mind. The sound of that bullet slamming into bark, the footsteps fleeing through the brush. He ends the story the same way every time, staring off into the distance as if he's still there, lying on the ground with his life flashing before his eyes. If I hadn't flinched, he tells me, you wouldn't be here right now. And that's when it hits me. That one split second, the timing of a breath, the smallest shift of his head, made the difference between me having a dad or growing up without one. Have you or someone you know ever felt hunted instead of being the hunter? If this story unsettled you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true horror stories. Hunting is supposed to put you closer to nature, but stories like these prove something. Sometimes the scariest thing in the woods isn't the animals. It's the people hiding among the trees.